The last person I expected to publicly humiliate me was the woman I had once opened my home and heart to. But Lena had a talent for timing. She didn't strike when no one was watching. No, she waited until the room was full, the phones were charged, and the cameras were rolling. It was my 67th birthday. I had spent the day preparing the house the way I always did for special occasions, soft classical music humming in the background. Fresh tulips placed gently in a crystal vase at the center of the dining table silverware, polished to a quiet gleam. I wore a lavender blouse with French lace cuffs, a navy skirt that I had tailored years ago in Rome, and a delicate brooch shaped like a rose passed down from my mother. To me, it was elegance. To Lena, it was ammunition. Jordan had texted in the morning to say they'd be bringing a few friends from Lena's influencer circle. I wasn't thrilled, but I agreed he was my only son, and this was the first time in months he'd be back under my roof. I wanted to make it easy. They arrived nearly an hour late. Lena walked in first, her heels clacking against the hardwood like gunfire. Her hair was pulled into a severe ponytail, and she wore a black mesh bodysuit tucked into vinyl pants so tight they creaked. Behind her trailed two young women carrying ring lights, cameras, and what looked like a foldable backdrop. Jordan followed behind them quietly, holding a bottle of wine and glancing nervously at me. Mother Lena said without looking me in the eye. "This is Charlotte and Ivy. They're shooting today's segment for my Style Reclaimed campaign. Hope you don't mind if we capture a little birthday footage." Before I could respond, Charlotte was already plugging a power strip into the wall near my antique hutch. Ivy had opened a large duffel bag and began assembling a collapsible backdrop directly in front of the fireplace. "Actually," I said calmly, "I'd rather keep this dinner just between family. I wasn't told you'd be filming." Lena let out a short, exasperated laugh. "Elaine, everything's content these days. Besides, this one's about generational fashion. You'll be the highlight." She smiled then. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dinner was served. I had made my famous spinach and ricotta cannelloni, a dish Jordan used to request for every birthday growing up. We sat around the table, but the conversation wasn't about food or family. It was about Lena's latest brand deal, Ivy's viral makeup tutorial, Charlotte's TikTok engagement rate. I was invisible until Lena decided I shouldn't be. "Okay, everyone," she said, rising to her feet and motioning for Charlotte to aim the camera at me. "It's time for our favorite game, Fashion Flashback." She walked behind me and gestured dramatically toward my outfit. "Let's talk about this look," she said loudly. "We've got lace, we've got pastels, we've got nostalgia." Elaine, tell us what inspired this timeless ensemble. There was scattered laughter around the table. I felt my face flush. "It's not a costume," I replied. "It's just what I like to wear." Lena gasped mockingly. "Oh my God, I didn't mean it like that. It's adorable. It's just, you know, vintage. Very living museum of fashion energy." I turned to Jordan. He looked away. Charlotte zoomed in. Ivy whispered something and giggled. "Don't worry," Lena added. "We're going to give you a full Lena-approved makeover one day. You'll be reborn. We'll call it From Antique to Chic." A few people clapped. I heard someone say, "She's savage," like it was a compliment. I stood slowly. My hands were steady, but my voice was quiet. "Excuse me," I said. "I need a moment." I walked into the hallway and shut the door behind me. In the silence of my room, I stared at the reflection in the tall mirror by the closet. I looked elegant, tasteful, dignified. But through their lens, I had been reduced to a joke, a prop. I opened my cedar chest and pulled out a portfolio I hadn't touched in years. Inside were sketches, garments I had designed when I was 23. Draped coats with cinched waists, evening gowns with sculpted necklines, swatches of silk I'd saved from my time in Florence. I had been accepted into a design apprenticeship in Paris the year I married Jordan's father. I chose family. I never regretted it. Until now. The next day, I wore the same outfit and went for a walk in the botanical garden. I needed air, and I needed to feel like myself again. A young woman with a camera approached me near the hydrangea path. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you part of an editorial shoot?" I shook my head. "No, just taking a walk." She smiled. "Would you mind if I took your photo? I'm working on a piece about personal style." "You have incredible presence." I agreed. I didn't think much of it until a week later when I received an email. The subject line read, "Congratulations, you've been selected for Vogue's fall feature." At first I thought it was spam, but it wasn't. The photo had been selected as one of 5 images to represent timeless elegance across generations. The caption read, "Elaine, 67, retired art teacher. Grace without effort." The article went viral. Lena's birthday video, in which she called me antique and museum ready, was still floating around online. But now, it was being stitched with side-by-side comparisons to the Vogue spread. The comments turned quickly. She said outdated, Vogue said iconic. Who's the real style influencer here? This is why you never underestimate the quiet woman in the room. People were tagging me. They were defending me. Strangers were thanking me for showing that age didn't erase beauty, it deepened it. I was invited to speak on a podcast about fashion evolution. A local gallery asked to display my old design sketches. And Jordan, for the first time in months, came to visit me alone. "Mom," he said, "I didn't realize what she was doing. I'm sorry." I didn't need his apology, but I appreciated it. At the next family dinner, I brought my copy of the magazine and set it gently on the table. Lena reached for it absently, then froze when she saw the page. Her lips parted. She looked at me, then at the photo, then back again. "This is real?" she asked. I nodded. She didn't speak for the rest of the night, and that was the moment I realized my style hadn't aged. My silence had. And I was done being quiet. If you've ever been humiliated like this, tell me where you're watching from and what you would have done. I read every city and every comment. There was a time when I thought of Lena as a daughter, not in the way one is forced to love through marriage, but in the way one hopes for. I remember the first time I met her. It was a Saturday in spring, and Jordan had invited me to lunch at a small cafe near the university where he taught. He didn't say much beforehand, only that there was someone special he wanted me to meet. Lena arrived 20 minutes late, rushing in with a canvas tote full of notebooks, oversized sunglasses on her head, and a coffee in hand. She apologized with a bright smile and touched my arm lightly as she sat down. Her lipstick was smudged at one corner, and her scarf was knotted haphazardly around her neck, but I saw something vibrant in her, an energy that reminded me of my own youth. She was sharp, opinionated, and passionate about everything from fashion to feminism. She challenged Jordan mid-sentence, laughed from the belly, and somehow made you feel like the center of her attention when she locked eyes with you. I was charmed. Over the months that followed, I welcomed her more fully into our lives. She came to Sunday dinners, stayed over during snowstorms, and helped me plant tulips one April when the frost came early. She called me Elaine at first, then Mama E by the second Thanksgiving. When Jordan proposed to her, she asked if I would help her pick out the wedding dress. I still have the photograph from that day, her standing on a pedestal in the boutique, draped in layers of satin and lace, her eyes welling with tears. She turned to me and whispered, "You're the only mother I've ever had who wanted me to feel beautiful." I didn't know much about her childhood, but I gathered enough. Her parents divorced when she was young. Her mother had been distant, more concerned with her own image than with Lena's scraped knees or broken hearts. Lena had been raised largely by nannies and boarding schools. She spoke of holidays as quiet and family as complicated. So I filled in the blanks. I made space. I showed up. When she and Jordan moved into their first apartment, I gave them my favorite kettle, the red enamel one I'd brought back from Provence. I cooked them freezer meals for the week. I helped Lena navigate her first IRS filing. When she had her wisdom teeth out, I stayed with her for 2 days while Jordan taught classes. I brought mashed potatoes, heated chamomile compresses, and read aloud from magazines while she drifted in and out of sleep. She would hold my hand, sometimes casually, as if it had always been hers to hold. One evening, during a blackout, we sat in my living room by candlelight. Jordan had gone to buy batteries, and Lena and I shared a blanket over our legs. She asked about my past, where I had studied how I met my husband, what I gave up to raise a family. I told her about the Parsons scholarship I turned down, about the fashion internship I declined. She listened intently. "You would have been amazing," she said. "You still could be." It was one of the kindest things anyone had said to me in years. We bonded over fabric swatches and old issues of Harper's Bazaar. She would bring me pieces from thrift shops and ask how I'd alter them. Sometimes I sewed for her a dart, here a hem there. Once she handed me a vintage floral dress and asked, "Can you make this wearable?" I turned it into a wrap with puff sleeves and a satin belt. She wore it to an art gala and tagged me in her post with the caption, "Styled by Mama E." The comment section was full of hearts and applause. She brought me matcha lattes. I showed her how to bake a sourdough loaf. We swapped books and recipes, sometimes even shoes. I felt needed, relevant, cherished. Jordan once said, "You two get along better than anyone I know. You're lucky to have each other." And I believed it. I believed it when she confided in me about her fears, her struggles, her feelings of inadequacy in a world that demanded curated perfection. I believed it when she cried on my shoulder the day her old college roommate got engaged. I believed it when she asked me if she looked good in a jumpsuit and waited for my honest answer before stepping out the door. And I truly believed it when she told me just a month after the wedding that she wanted me to help her design her future home colors, textures, everything. She said I had taste that transcended generations. We would spend hours looking through Pinterest boards and old catalogues. She would point at something and ask, "Is this timeless or just tired?" And I would laugh, offering guidance with joy in my chest. I never saw the slow unraveling. It began quietly in moments too small to hold suspicion. A missed call not returned. A last-minute cancellation for lunch. An odd glance exchanged when I gave a compliment on her outfit. She started referring to my suggestions as quaint. She said it with a smile, but the edge was there. I brushed it off. We all change, I thought. Maybe she was just busier. Maybe marriage had shifted her. When they moved into their new house, I brought over homemade curtains and embroidered pillows. She said they were beautiful, but didn't fit the aesthetic. Still, I left them behind. She began to answer my texts with emojis instead of words. Then with one-word replies. Then with nothing. One day I sent her a photo of a blouse I'd made from scratch, a soft yellow cotton with hand-stitched pleats. She never responded. Weeks later, I saw the same fabric reinterpreted in one of her blog posts. She didn't mention me, but back then I still defended her. To my sister, to my friends, even to myself. She's just finding her way, I'd say. She's under pressure. People evolve. And the truth was, I missed her. I missed the version of her who held my hand. The woman who once called me her safe place. The one who said I was the mother she never had. I replayed those memories over and over, trying to understand what had changed. Had I done something? Had I become too old, too predictable, too in the way? But every time I asked Jordan, he shrugged and said, "You're overthinking it." Perhaps I was. But even as she drifted further, I held on to hope. Because that's what mothers do, whether by blood or by bond. We remember the good. We hold on to the best parts. We believe that love has memory, that kindness counts for something, that history isn't so easily erased. Until the day it is. Until the moment she stood in my home, surrounded by her friends and cameras, and turned me into a punchline. until the moment I realized that the woman I once loved like a daughter had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a character in her content. And even then, even after the sting of public mockery, I still found myself thinking back to the day she called me Mama E, with tears in her eyes and a wedding dress on her shoulders. That was the day I thought I'd gained a daughter. Now I know it was the day I unknowingly handed her everything she'd later try to tear apart. Looking back, I often wonder when exactly it started, the moment when affection gave way to indifference, when warmth cooled into politeness, and when the woman who once called me her second mother began to see me as something less. It wasn't sudden. That's the thing. There was no declaration, no argument, no slammed door. It was quieter than that, softer. The kind of change you only recognize in hindsight, like a crack in the ceiling you never noticed until the rain came through. At first, it was her tone, the way she stopped saying my name. She used to call me Mama E, or sometimes Lainey when she was being playful. But slowly, my name became her when she spoke about me in the third person to Jordan. Is she coming to the event? Did you tell her we're running late? Can she make her salad again? Then there were the missed messages. Texts read, but not answered. Emails about a recipe she once loved that she now ignored. I brushed it off. People get busy. Life gets faster. I told myself I was imagining it. But each silence lasted a little longer. One afternoon, I dropped by their house, unannounced. I had baked lemon scones, the kind Lena used to beg me to make. The door was unlocked. I walked in and found her in the living room, filming herself. She wore a cropped blazer, high-waisted leather pants, and bright red lipstick. She didn't hear me at first. When she finally looked up, she didn't smile. "Oh," she said flatly, "I wish you'd texted." "I didn't want to bother you," I said, lifting the container. "I made your favorites." She glanced at the scones, but didn't move to take them. "I'm on a clean eating program this month. But Jordan might want one." I set them on the counter and tried to make small talk. She stayed standing. Her responses were clipped mechanical. After a few minutes, I excused myself and walked to the door. Just before I opened it, I heard her sigh behind me. "You always mean well," she said. "But you really don't get boundaries, do you?" I paused. That word boundaries hung in the air like a slap I hadn't expected. I didn't reply. I simply nodded and left. The next week, I saw the scones untouched, still sitting in the container inside their fridge during a visit with Jordan. Little things started to pile up. They moved into a new house, and I wasn't asked for help with the interior design, despite all the times we'd dreamed about it together. I offered suggestions for curtains or wall colors, but she waved them off. "We've got a designer," she said. "We're going minimalist. Scandinavian chic." When I brought up a handmade vase I'd saved for them, she said, "We're trying not to clutter the space." She started calling my taste classic, which sounded flattering, but was always followed by a pause that implied outdated. If I complimented her outfits, she'd reply with a tight smile and a polite, "Thanks," then look away like I was embarrassing her. She stopped tagging me in social media posts when she wore things I helped adjust. She never asked for alterations again. It was like I had gone from being a trusted source to an obligation, a relic, something she tolerated but no longer valued. The real shift came with the holidays. Thanksgiving had always been at my house. It was tradition. I had Jordan's favorite recipes down to the teaspoon. But that year they told me they were hosting to take the burden off me, Lena had said. I smiled and agreed, though I hadn't asked for help. I offered to bring my apple pie, the one Jordan always requested. "We already have dessert covered," she replied. "But feel free to bring wine." When I arrived, I noticed the pie I had brought anyway was placed at the far end of the dessert table, nearly hidden behind a tower of gourmet cupcakes from a local bakery. No one touched it. During dinner, I tried to engage. I asked Lena about her latest project, about her travels, about the new blog series. She gave brief answers, then redirected the conversation to people I didn't know. When I complimented the centerpieces, she said I wanted something modern, not like those lace runners you love. Clean lines, neutral tones. You know, less grandmotherly. My sister-in-law shot me a look across the table. I forced a smile and picked at my cranberry sauce. Later that evening, I helped clean up. Lena was in the kitchen rearranging her fridge with military precision. Where should I put the leftovers? I asked, holding a glass container. She didn't turn around. Maybe take them with you? We're doing a reset next week, cleansing, detoxing, that sort of thing. I can put them in the freezer, I offered. She sighed. It's not about space. It's about intention. I'm really trying to curate what we keep. I didn't respond. That word again. Curate. As if life was a museum exhibit, and I was an artifact that no longer matched the theme. When I left that night, Jordan walked me to the car. He hugged me quickly, already checking his phone. She's just under pressure, he said. You know how she gets. I nodded, but something inside me cracked. A few weeks later, she changed the guest list to their New Year's Eve party. I was no longer on it. She claimed it was influencer only for branding reasons. When I saw the photos online later, I noticed Jordan's cousins were there. My niece. Even our neighbor's daughter, whom Lena had met twice. But not me. That was the first New Year's Eve I spent alone since my husband passed away. Still, I tried to reach out. I sent a message the next day telling her I missed our coffee chats. She left it on read. I began noticing her content shifting too. Her blog posts and videos once featured thrifted fashion and heartfelt stories. Now they focused on aesthetics, minimalism, decluttering people, not just things. She spoke about generational conditioning and protecting your energy from outdated expectations. Sometimes I wondered if she was talking about me without saying my name. I wasn't invited to their anniversary dinner, nor to the launch party for her new collection. I sent flowers. I never received a thank you. And yet, every so often, she'd post something nostalgic, a recipe I gave her, a quote. I once said a photo cropped just enough that my presence was hidden behind a filter. She erased me gently, elegantly. Jordan remained neutral through it all. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd say, "It's just how things are now." Lena's focused on her brand. One afternoon, I arrived at their home for a surprise visit, something I hadn't done in months. I brought a small painting I had found at an estate sale. It reminded me of Lena's dream office, the one she had described to me once over chamomile tea. She opened the door and didn't hide her disappointment. "Elaine," she said slowly, "we weren't expecting you." I smiled, lifting the wrapped canvas. "I saw this and thought of you. I just wanted to drop it off." She took it reluctantly. "We're really trying to move away from that aesthetic." She didn't invite me in. I stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked back to my car. As I drove home, I began to realize that something irreversible had occurred, not because of a single moment, but because of many. The erosion had been gradual, almost invisible, but the cliff had crumbled all the same. There had been a time when she saw me as a mentor, a guide, maybe even a mother. Now I was a burden, a reflection she didn't want to see, a voice she no longer needed. But something inside me, something deeper than pride, refused to let go of the belief that I still mattered, that I still had something to offer. That style, like love, didn't expire with age. I didn't yet know how far she would go to erase me from the picture. I didn't know how public it would become, or how cruel. But I knew this much. The warmth I once felt had cooled, the connection had thinned, and the cracks, though quiet, were beginning to split the foundation wide open. It was never just one insult. It was never one slight, one forgotten invitation, one whisper behind my back. It was the collection of them. The slow stacking of disrespect upon indifference, of silence upon dismissal, until the weight of it all bent something in me that had once stood tall. There is a kind of pain that doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't shout. It simply appears and stays day after day, wearing down your sense of place in your own life. It began with the birthday brunch. Not mine, Lena's. She had turned 32. and the celebration was extravagant rooftop venue live music, white roses shipped in from Ecuador, a private chef preparing fusion tapas. Everyone was there, her friends, her stylist, her business partner, even her high school friend who'd moved to Atlanta. Everyone except me. I hadn't been told. I only found out when my niece texted me a photo from the party saying, "You look amazing in this picture." Aunt Elaine confused. I opened the image and saw a photo Lena had reposted from last year's garden lunch, cropping me next to her with a caption, "So grateful for the powerful women in my life, but I wasn't invited this year." My phone was silent. When I confronted Jordan, he said it was a last-minute thing, more of a brand event. I asked, am I not part of her brand? He didn't answer. That weekend, I baked a vanilla almond cake, her favorite. I wrapped it with a satin ribbon and dropped it off on their porch. Later that night, I saw Lena's Instagram story, the cake unopened, placed next to a sponsored pastry box from a luxury bakery with a caption, "Options are everything." She never messaged me about it. From there it grew. They stopped inviting me to dinners altogether. When I tried to host, Jordan would say, "Lena's schedule is really tight right now. Maybe next month." That month never came. One Sunday afternoon, I drove to the house unannounced again this time because I missed them. I hadn't seen Jordan in nearly 6 weeks. When I arrived, I rang the doorbell. No one answered, but I could hear laughter inside. Music, clinking glasses. I walked around to the side of the house. Through the slats of the backyard fence, I saw a full garden party in progress, charcuterie platters, champagne flutes, women in wide-brimmed hats. My niece was there. So was my neighbor's daughter. But not me. I stood for a long time on the sidewalk before turning back to my car. A week later, Jordan stopped by for 20 minutes. No Lena. He said they were working through some scheduling tension. I offered him tea. He declined. I asked if he wanted to stay for lunch. He looked at his watch. That was how it began to feel. Like every invitation I extended was an inconvenience. But the deepest cut came during Easter. I had decorated my home with soft pastels, laid out the fine, China-made roasted lamb and rosemary potatoes, even printed place cards for everyone. It was tradition. I had done it every year since Jordan was 5. The table was set for 8. No one came. At first I thought they were late. Then I checked my phone and saw a post Lena Jordan and 6 others on a vineyard lawn. Easter brunch with our chosen family, the caption read. I stared at those words for a long time. Chosen family. I had given birth to him, fed him, fought for him. And yet somehow I was not part of what had been chosen. I texted Jordan. He didn't reply until 2 days later, a "Sorry, Mom. Lena didn't want to stress you with last-minute changes." He didn't explain why I wasn't invited. He didn't ask how I'd spent the holiday. And I didn't tell him I had eaten alone in silence, surrounded by flowers and untouched dishes. After that, I stopped offering to cook. But that didn't stop Lena from helping herself to my recipes. One afternoon, while scrolling through her latest blog post, I noticed a familiar pattern. Her signature lemon thyme chicken was mine word for word, even down to the secret of whisking Dijon into the marinade before roasting. No mention of me. No credit. Just Lena's Sunday classic. She had taken my food, my words, my heart, and rebranded them under her name. When I brought it up to Jordan, he said she didn't do it maliciously. It's just part of content culture. That phrase made me feel sick. What culture allowed someone to erase their past and still profit from it? Later that summer, Lena invited me over under the guise of resetting the energy in their home. She said she had read something about decluttering people-pleasing objects. I didn't know what she meant until I arrived and found a row of boxes in the foyer. Inside them were gifts I had given them over the years. The Provence kettle, the embroidered quilt I had stitched after their engagement, my mother's crystal vase, a brass mirror that once hung in their guest room. We're just creating space for what aligns, Lena explained. Jordan stood beside her, silent. I thought these were things you loved, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They were, she said, but that was a different chapter. She didn't even look apologetic. As I carried the boxes to my car, something inside me began to fracture in a way I couldn't name. Not quite sadness, not quite rage, but a bitter silence that spread through my chest like fog. Then came the finances. I had once given them access to my accountant when Jordan started his consulting business. At the time, Lena was grateful. "You're so generous," she'd said. Most people don't trust their in-laws with that kind of thing. Now I began noticing irregularities. I received mail addressed to a new LLC with my name on it. I discovered that Jordan had used my home address as a registered business location without asking. A tax form was sent in error to me instead of him. When I opened it, I saw something that made my blood run cold. He had listed me as a silent investor. I hadn't signed anything. When I asked him, he brushed it off. "It's just a technicality. Lena's advisor said it's cleaner this way." Cleaner? That word again. As if I were a stain to be scrubbed. I went to my own accountant. She reviewed my filings and advised me gently to start separating my finances. When she asked if I trusted my family with my estate, I couldn't answer right away. I thought of the birthday video, the cake she never touched, the guest lists I'd been erased from, the decor she returned without a glance. I thought of being called adorable like a pet, of being filmed, laughed at, dismissed in my own home. And then I thought of something that chilled me. What if Lena wasn't just passively excluding me? What if she was deliberately removing me? One quiet September morning, I arrived early to surprise Jordan with muffins. I hadn't done that in months. I just missed him. Lena opened the door in a silk robe. Her expression dropped when she saw me. "You should have called," she said. "I thought I'd catch you both before your day started." She sighed. "We were just sitting down for a meeting." Before I could respond, she stepped aside. Their dining table had been turned into a filming setup, lights, cameras, mood boards. One of them showed their house in neutral tones. The other showed mine. Under it, the word Legacy Flip. "What's that?" I asked. She blinked. "Oh, it's just an idea we're pitching. Kind of a minimalist reinvention project. Multi-generational assets and how to modernize them for brand integrity." She said it like it meant nothing, like I wouldn't understand, but I did. That was my house, my furniture, my kitchen. I stood frozen muffins still in hand. "You're planning to film in my home?" I asked. She shrugged. "It's got aesthetic appeal, but we'd need to make a few tweaks, obviously." She was using the home I had built to showcase a narrative that excluded me. Later that week, I found a proposal draft on Jordan's desk while dropping off his dry cleaning. The document included phrases like "maximize nostalgic architecture" by recontextualizing domestic matriarchal space. I was the matriarch. They wanted to recontextualize me out of my own life. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I began documenting things, saving screenshots, printing out email receipts, writing down timelines. Not because I had a plan, but because I needed to remind myself that what I felt was real. That the slights weren't imagined, that the pain wasn't paranoia. I called my lawyer, just to update a few things, I said. He asked why, and for the first time I said the words aloud. "I think my daughter-in-law is trying to erase me. Publicly, legally, emotionally." He didn't laugh. He asked when I wanted to meet. That night, I opened a blank journal and wrote one sentence on the first page. "She thinks I'm too quiet to notice." But I noticed. And she was about to learn that the quiet ones remember everything. Some truths arrive like lightning, sudden, blinding, and impossible to ignore. But others creep in like fog, wrapping themselves around your ankles until you're wading through a story you didn't know you were living. Mine began with a calendar invite. It was a small thing, almost nothing. I received a notification on my phone, "Legacy content, walkthrough session. Tuesday, 10 hours in or 0 a.m. The sender's name was familiar Lena. At first I assumed it was a mistake. Perhaps she had added me by accident. But something about the phrase legacy content made my skin tighten. I clicked through. It was a Google Meet session set up through her brand's shared workspace. The title of the project was Reclaiming Heritage from Matriarchy to Modernism. Under the event description were 6 bullet points. I don't remember them all. My eyes had gone blurry by the third line. But the one that stayed with me read, Discussion on Narrative Shift Editing or Replacing Maternal Imagery for Optimized Generational Appeal. Maternal imagery, that was me. I was the imagery. I was the narrative. I was the outdated version of the story she wanted to tell. I didn't attend the meeting. Instead, I logged into an old Google account that I hadn't used in years. It was one that Jordan had helped me set up ages ago when he was still in college. Out of habit, he had once used my email as his backup recovery address. When I typed it in, I didn't expect access. But suddenly I was in. His shared drive was full of folders, most with project names, tax documents, renovation plans. I scrolled through mostly out of anger, maybe grief, maybe curiosity. I clicked on one labeled Brand Architecture, third revision. Inside were design proposals, content strategies, scripts for ad campaigns. I opened a draft labeled Pitch Script, Generational Disconnect Campaign. And there it was, line after line, Lena's voice on paper. We've all inherited styles, beliefs, habits that no longer serve us. This series will explore how to respectfully but decisively detach from them. She had underlined respectfully but decisively. The next section was more explicit. In episode 1, we focus on the idea of appearance. The matriarch archetype is typically seen as warm, traditional frumpy. Our goal is to contrast this with sleek, intelligent, future-forward aesthetics. Our ideal viewer will want to shed the weight of inherited femininity and claim her own silhouette. It was all branding, cold, academic, ruthless. Another file had production notes, storyboard sketches. In the frame labeled Before a Woman stood beside an antique mirror wearing a lavender blouse and long navy skirt. In the afterframe, a younger woman, taller, bolder, wore a white power suit with metallic heels. The mirror was shattered. I scrolled further. A document titled Content Planning. Autumn series included a checklist: film, in inherited spaces, childhood home, family kitchen, mother-in-law's garden. Capture innocuous domestic behaviors, ironing, baking, sewing as symbols of outdated identity, contrast with modern alternatives, co-working, ordering in automation. Then came the part that froze my breath. Use Elaine's home as a narrative set, subtly recast presence to avoid legal claims. Subtly recast presence. Avoid legal claims. My own name. My own house. A few clicks later, I found another folder marked Vendor Contracts. Inside were NDAs, invoices from stylists and decorators I had never met, people Lena had hired to modernize elements of my kitchen, my backyard, even my foyer. One vendor noted paint recommendations: remove floral wallpaper, neutralize sentimental zones, especially display cabinet. Sentimental zones. That was where I kept the figurine Jordan made in 3rd grade. The one he gave me after he broke his arm and cried in the hospital because he was afraid of the needle. That cabinet held 37 years of memory. To them, it was a zone, an obstacle, something to neutralize. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. My chest burned, not from sadness, but from clarity. They weren't just phasing me out emotionally. They were repurposing my life into aesthetic content. Later that evening, I called my neighbor, Nadine. She was the one person I trusted with everything. She had been my friend for 22 years, since the days we spent painting our porches and trading recipes over the fence. Nadine listened as I spoke. She didn't interrupt. When I told her about the files, the photos, the phrasing, she asked only one question. "Do you want to know something else?" I nodded. She hesitated. I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure it was my place. But a few weeks ago, Lena asked me if I'd be willing to share stories about your decorating habits. She said it was for a personal documentary, something about exploring how women over 60 cling to aesthetic nostalgia. I stared at her. She wanted quotes, Nadine added. She asked if you'd ever expressed fear of being left behind, if you'd mentioned feeling invisible. I haven't, I whispered. I know, Nadine said. That's why I didn't participate. The next day, I received a call from a woman I'd never met. She introduced herself as a casting coordinator from a streaming platform. She said Lena had pitched a show that had been shortlisted. It's very exciting, she said. You must be proud. I asked her what the show was about. She paused. Well, it's early stage, but the premise centers on a younger woman helping older relatives update their lives. A sort of makeover meets mentorship dynamic. I asked her if I was part of the show. From what I understand, she said carefully, you're the initial inspiration. The pilot episode takes place in your home. She said it with the softness of someone dropping a glass they hoped would bounce. I thanked her and hung up. Later that night, I called Jordan. I know everything I told him. He was quiet. I know about the pilot. I know about the rebranding plan. I've read the files. I saw the photos. Mom, don't I said, don't try to make this better. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, you were never supposed to find out like this. So it's all true. She's not trying to hurt you, he said. She's just building something at my expense. He didn't deny it. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same one Lena had once called charmingly old-fashioned. I looked around at the cabinets, the framed family photo above the stove. The apron hooks the rug from the year Jordan was born. They wanted to erase all of it. Me, my history, my presence. But what they hadn't counted on was this. I had proof. Screenshots, contracts, emails, voice memos from Nadine. The call log from the producer, a journal full of dates, quotes, and details. I no longer felt betrayed. I felt ready. Because secrets only have power when they remain hidden. And Lena's strategy, her curated erasure of everything I had given, was no longer private. She had chosen to document everything, to record, to archive, to brand. And in doing so, she had handed me every weapon I needed. They wanted my house, my name, my legacy. But they had forgotten one thing. You can't rebrand the truth. You can only hope it stays quiet. And I was done being quiet. I didn't start off resenting her. In fact, for a time, I genuinely admired Elaine. She was composed, elegant, in a way you rarely see anymore. She had this timeless sort of poise that didn't come from money or image, but from something much older, like a code written before I was born. And at the beginning, I wanted to learn it. I wanted to belong to that world. When I met Jordan, he introduced her as the rock of our family, and she was. Always calm, always dressed with care, always prepared with advice or a meal or a memory. She made you feel like you had stepped into a picture frame, everything perfectly placed. I told myself I was lucky to be marrying into something so stable. But over time I began to notice things. It started with the way Jordan deferred to her. He loved her deeply, and I respected that. But I also noticed that he still asked her opinion before making decisions about our life, where we lived, how we spent holidays, even what to do with our savings. She was always polite, never overstepping. But she was always there. When we moved into our first apartment, she arrived with curtains and antique teacups and said I thought these would warm the place up. I smiled, said thank you, and let her hang them. But I didn't like them. They made the space feel like someone else's memory, like a story I didn't write. I began to feel like I was marrying into a narrative, not just a man. A narrative with floral borders and lace centerpieces. A narrative that had already been written, and I was just being asked to play the role of the modern daughter-in-law who appreciated the vintage charm of her elders. At first I tried to mold myself into that role. I let her style my hair for the wedding. I wore the pearls she gave me. I hosted dinner parties with her casserole recipes. I learned her potato gratin method, even though I hated the texture. I posed in photos with her homemade quilts and captioned them with Nah's blessed. But the more I played along, the less I recognized myself. There was a moment, a small one, but it stuck. I had just signed my first small brand deal with a local boutique. It wasn't much, but it felt like something that was mine. I posted a photo of myself in a thrifted jacket I had upcycled. The caption was simple, modern look, vintage roots. Elaine commented, "That's my old scarf, right? The one I gave you last fall?" It was, but I hadn't wanted the focus to be on her. I deleted the post. Not out of spite, but because I suddenly felt like I wasn't allowed to be anything without her fingerprints showing. Every piece of me that had style, grace, or warmth was somehow owed to her influence. It began to suffocate me. I didn't hate her. I hated how much space she took up in my identity. People praised how close we were. "You're so lucky to have a mother-in-law like that," they'd say. "She's practically a second mum." And yes, she had been kind. She had listened to my insecurities, comforted me when I cried about my own mother brought soup when I was sick. But she also occupied every space I wanted to grow into. She baked before I could learn how. She advised before I could process. She suggested before I could decide. When we moved into our new home, I made the decision that this space would reflect me, my taste, my voice. I told Jordan I wanted to redesign the kitchen. He said, "We should ask Mom." "She knows these things," I snapped. For the first time, I said I want something that doesn't come from her. He looked hurt. I didn't care. It wasn't that I disliked her aesthetic. I just didn't want it to be mine. And somewhere along the way, the warmth between us cooled. She kept offering things. Kept showing up with baskets of bread, hand-stitched linens, memory-laden decor. I knew each item was a gesture of love, but it also felt like a claim. As my platform grew, I struggled with authenticity. I wanted to be seen as innovative, modern, bold. But I also had a house full of inherited styles and a mother-in-law who, despite being elegant, represented a version of femininity I was trying to move beyond. I wanted to reimagine legacy, not destroy it, but reinterpret it. But I didn't know how to tell her that without hurting her. So instead, I minimized her. I kept her out of meetings. I excluded her from branding decisions. I stopped tagging her. I told myself it was cleaner that way. Simpler. Less emotional clutter. And then I said it. At her birthday. The joke. It wasn't meant to go viral. It wasn't even meant to be cruel. It was just part of the bit, me poking fun at how she dressed like a Vogue feature from the 60s. But when the video spread, when people started picking sides, I saw her eyes in that clip, quiet hurt, stunned. I told myself it was just content. But the truth is, I had turned her into a symbol. I had used her as contrast. I had chosen her to represent everything I wanted to leave behind, not because she was wrong, but because I needed to feel like I was right. And it worked. People clapped. The algorithm rewarded me. I gained new followers who loved the idea of shedding grandmother aesthetics. I booked partnerships with brands that echoed modern reinvention. But I lost something too. When I saw her photo in Vogue, something cracked in me. Not because I was jealous, though maybe I was, but because I realized how little I had ever truly seen her. She hadn't worn that outfit to prove anything. She wore it because it was her. I had mocked her, not for what she wore, but for how confident she was in wearing it. And that terrified me, because for all my curation, all my filters and branding and lighting and messaging, I had never felt that sure of myself. She walked through the world unapologetic before I even knew what that word meant. So yes, I used her. I used her grace to give my rebellion meaning. I used her presence to define my absence. And in doing so, I didn't just edit her out of the story. I betrayed the woman who once stood next to me while I chose my wedding dress and said, "You deserve to feel beautiful." I don't know if she'll ever forgive me. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I needed you to know I didn't start out resenting her. I just didn't know how to grow next to someone who had already bloomed so completely. The call came at 6:17 p.m. on a Wednesday. I was folding laundry, my hands steady, my mind elsewhere. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years, Celia Grant. Celia had once worked in the same school district where I taught art. She'd been an administrator, sharp, composed, diplomatic. We had served on the same faculty board, though we were never especially close. I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade. Still, I answered, "Elaine." Her voice was the same. Calm, exact. "Celia," I replied cautiously. "It's been a long time." "It has," she said. "And I wouldn't be calling now if it weren't important." She paused, then continued with a kind of urgency I wasn't used to hearing from her. "I've been consulting part-time for a digital branding agency, mostly advisory, nothing too intense. But a few weeks ago, I was brought into a project under NDA. When I saw the footage and recognized your home, I knew I had to find a way to reach you." I felt my spine straighten. "What footage?" I asked. "Elaine, they're building a show around you. Not officially, of course. You're being referred to as the legacy figure. They've rewritten your name in scripts. But the house is yours. The timeline is yours. And the lead mentor, that's Lena." I closed my eyes. Celia continued, "I'm breaking protocol by telling you this, but ethically I couldn't stay quiet. The storyboards, the pitch decks, they all describe a series where Lena helps real women overcome inherited limitations. And they're using your likeness, your history, your home as the framework." "How far along are they?" I asked. "They're negotiating brand partners," she said, "and they've already filmed a preliminary walkthrough using stand-in actors in a staged replica of your living room." The air left my lungs. "Elaine," she said softly, "I don't think they believe you'll fight back." That was when I knew it wasn't just personal anymore. It was strategic. I had been turned into intellectual property, a visual symbol stripped of consent. I thanked her. She offered to send a redacted version of the pitch deck. I gave her a private email address. Then I sat still for a long time. The next morning, I drove 2 towns over to the law office of Marcia Hollander. Marcia was a woman you didn't forget. We'd met once before at a community legal aid luncheon. She had striking white hair and a voice like silk over steel. I remembered her because she once told a group of board members that empathy and litigation are not mutually exclusive. She welcomed me into her office without question. I laid it all out. The video footage, the pilot script references, the legacy rebranding language, the quiet financial transfers Jordan had made using my address, the vendors hired to document my belongings. She listened without interruption. Then she said, "We need to get ahead of this before it becomes legally harder to untangle. Has anything been published yet under your name?" "Not yet," I said, "but they're close." "Good," she replied. "We still have leverage, but we'll need documentation. Everything you can gather. I'll file an IP protection memo and initiate a cease and desist clause if they try to release anything using direct visual representation of your property." We began that day. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a quiet detective in my own life. I began recording conversations. Not sneakily, but carefully. Anytime Lena spoke about her projects, I took notes. I reviewed the house for changes she might have already captured angles where she had filmed without my knowing. I backed up my emails, printed bank statements, took photographs of every room in my house with timestamps and geolocation metadata. I contacted Nadine again. She agreed to sign a sworn affidavit stating that Lena had approached her under false pretenses to gather character statements about me. I had Celia's email, her redacted file, and now a timeline. Marcia filed a preliminary injunction notice to Lena's production company. We didn't send it yet, but it was ready. Then something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text, a handwritten note. It was from Veronica, one of Lena's former interns. We'd met once briefly when she was helping Lena with her early blog redesigns. I remembered her because she complimented my brooch. Her letter was 2 pages long. She wrote, "I don't know if you remember me, but I worked with Lena for 6 months. I left quietly because something didn't feel right. I'm writing to you now because I overheard her and a partner discuss strategies for emotional contrast in her new content. They used the phrase, manufactured generational tension. I asked if you had agreed to participate, and she laughed and said, She won't know until it's already made, and by then she'll be flattered. I think you deserve to know that none of this is an accident. I kept that letter. I added it to the folder. I digitized everything. Then, for the first time in months, I sat across from Jordan in a quiet cafe. I slid the folder across the table. He flipped through the first few pages, paused. His face went pale. Where did you get this? From people who still respect me, I said. This looks bad, he muttered. It is bad, I replied. And it's not just Lena anymore. It's you too. I didn't know it had gone this far. You knew enough to stay quiet. He swallowed. What do you want? I want my story back. He didn't speak again for a long time. I left him with the folder. That evening, I received an email from Marcia. A new clause had been added to the filing, a provisional asset protection agreement, tied to any media property using content derivative of my likeness language or interior space. We were ready. Lena still hadn't reached out. But I could feel the pressure building. A few days later, I opened my front door to find a bouquet of white lilies. No card, no signature. I placed them in the trash, because no gesture, no flower, no comment, no nervous apology would undo what had been done. This wasn't about being outdated anymore. This was about identity, about voice, about the right to own your story even when someone else tries to edit you out of it. They had underestimated me. I wasn't soft anymore, and I wasn't done. The invitation came in the form of a mass email. Lena had organized a brand showcase event, an immersive fashion and generational storytelling experience, as she called it. The subject line read, Legacy Unfolded, a Private Evening with Lena. It was sent to a long list of names, including stylists, journalists, influencers, and select members of the family. I hadn't planned to go, at least not until I received a phone call from Celia. They're going to use your house, she said. Well, not literally, but the mock set was built off your original layout. She's presenting it tonight as part of her brand history. What do you mean? I asked. They've rebranded your kitchen, recreated it in a studio, rewritten the past. That was enough. I hadn't fought this hard, collected this many receipts, endured this many silences, just to let them parade my life around under soft lighting and whitewashed captions. I called Marcia. She cleared me to attend with documentation. I printed the cease and desist letter, the notarized affidavits, the legal notices with my signature and hers. I wore the same lavender blouse and navy skirt Lena had mocked in her now-deleted video. Not because I was trying to prove a point, but because it was mine. I wore it like armor. My voice, my fabric, my story. The venue was a sleek art gallery, downtown minimalist walls, curated lighting, abstract projections of flowing textiles, flickering phrases like reclaiming womanhood, elevating the past, and letting go of inherited limits. I arrived 15 minutes before the program started. No one recognized me at first. I was handed a glass of sparkling water, a name badge that said Elaine Carter, and directed to the third installation room. There I saw it, my kitchen. Not exactly, but close enough. The teal cabinetry, the worn copper kettle, the lace curtains, a glass jar with hand-labeled spices. Even the same photograph of Jordan in first grade, blurred but familiar. There was a display sign next to it. Legacy Kitchen, reimagined what we inherit, what we outgrow. People were taking photos, whispering, admiring. I moved through the space slowly. No one stopped me. Then the lights dimmed, and the presentation began. Lena appeared on a minimalist stage in a white pantsuit. The spotlight found her. She smiled. I'm so grateful to welcome you all tonight, she began. This journey has been about evolution, about remembering where we came from, but also deciding where we want to go next. There was applause. She continued. We've all been shaped by those before us. Mothers, grandmothers, mentors, women who built homes, traditions, memories. But sometimes in honoring them, we lose ourselves. Tonight, I want to honor the past by letting it evolve. I watched her glide into her speech like it was choreography. She gestured to the set behind her. This was inspired by someone I once loved very much. Someone whose grace I admired, but whose presence I couldn't breathe beneath. That was it, the unspoken name, my silhouette. I stepped forward. Not loudly, not rudely, just enough to be seen. Several people noticed. Some looked away, some tilted their heads. Lena saw me. Her voice wavered. She stumbled. We're so lucky to have legacies to learn from. I kept walking. I stopped at the front row. My purse hung lightly at my side. From it, I pulled out the folder. Thick, heavy, labeled. I stepped up onto the platform. There was a murmur. A producer moved toward me but hesitated. Elaine Lena said tightly, her smile frozen. This isn't really the time. It's exactly the time, I replied. Her eyes widened. The audience leaned in. I turned to them. My name is Elaine Carter, I said. Some of you may not know me, but this set you've been admiring, that's not reimagined. It's stolen. A gasp. I didn't give permission for my home, my story, or my image to be used for this event. What you're looking at is a fictionalized version of my life curated without my consent. Lena took a step forward. Elaine, let's discuss this later. No, I said. We've discussed enough in silence. I turned to the crowd. She filmed me without my knowledge, mocked me online, built an entire brand off my likeness. This event, this campaign, was crafted by erasing me while imitating me. I held up the folder. These are legal documents, signed, sealed, and delivered to her team 2 weeks ago. They were ignored. I passed the documents to a nearby journalist. My lawyer is here tonight. If any of this footage is used, we will pursue a full injunction under California's right of publicity statute. The crowd was now dead silent. Lena's face had gone pale. I turned to her one last time. I opened my home to you, my heart, my history, and you used it for content. Not to honor, but to replace. That ends tonight. I stepped down from the platform. Someone began to clap. Just one. Then another. Then more. Lena stood frozen. I walked out of the venue as the applause built behind me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady, firm, like the sound of truth finally being heard. Outside, Marcia was waiting by the car. How'd it go? She asked. They heard me, I said. And for the first time in months, I felt seen not as a legacy, but as a person. The silence that followed the confrontation didn't last long. Within 48 hours, Lena's inbox was flooded not just with media inquiries, but with legal notifications. The cease and desist from Marcia Hollander had been formally delivered and logged. The production company she'd quietly partnered with received a certified notice invoking California Civil Code 3344, the law protecting against unauthorized use of one's likeness or identity for commercial gain. The language was clear. Elaine Carter, as a private citizen and identifiable subject, had never granted permission for her likeness, domestic imagery, history, or personal property to be recreated or distributed under Lena's brand or any affiliated production. The letter was accompanied by a declaration of intellectual property infringement, intent to pursue damages, and documentation of fraud involving Lena's prior filings that included Elaine's home as a registered creative location without consent. It didn't end there. What Lena hadn't realized was that Elaine had been preparing her own legal fortress long before the night of the event. Months earlier, when the cracks had started widening and the first signs of erasure began to appear, Elaine had visited her estate planner. She had rewritten her will, and this time it no longer included Jordan as primary heir. She had also created a revocable living trust, transferring the title of her house, her savings, and her intellectual property archive into the name of the Carter Living Trust, with strict asset control protections that shielded them from marital extension, third-party claims, or post-mortem reinterpretation. No one had known, not even Nadine, not until it mattered. Marcia filed a notice of asset isolation with the county clerk's office, ensuring the property could not be used in any promotional materials without express written approval from the trustee. Then came the financial audit, using documents gathered during the investigation, emails, shared drives, statements. Marcia connected the dots between Lena's brand launch and suspicious fund flows that had been recorded under Jordan's LLC. Several of these filings included Elaine's name, property address, and tax ID in ways that legally constituted financial exploitation of a senior under California Welfare and Institutions Code, 11566. What Lena thought had been a creative workaround was now potentially a criminal act. A subpoena was drafted. A formal complaint was filed with the California Department of Justice's Elder Abuse Division, citing not just unauthorized branding, but misuse of identity emotional coercion and unauthorized use of private residence and likeness for profit. And then, as the dust rose, came the final card. Marcia filed a federal copyright claim. Elaine had begun months ago digitizing and cataloging her original fashion sketches, journals, photographs, and design elements, all of which Lena had referenced in her content without acknowledgement. By officially registering them with the U.S. Copyright Office, Elaine now had legal grounds to sue for willful infringement, including damages up to $150,000 per instance. The production halted. Lena's pending sponsorships were paused indefinitely. The streaming partner released a quiet statement. The project, titled Legacy Unfolded, has been shelved pending legal review and rights clearance. Elaine didn't celebrate with champagne. She didn't gloat on social media. She spent that evening on her porch sipping tea and watching the sun move through the treetops. The house was quiet. She liked it that way. The next day, Jordan came to visit. He looked different, smaller somehow. He sat on the same kitchen stool where he once did his homework, while Elaine kneaded bread. "Mom," he said, "I've filed for legal separation." Elaine looked at him, expression unreadable. "I didn't know how far it had gone," he continued. "But that's not an excuse. I let it happen. I let her take over everything, not just you. Me too." Elaine placed a folded envelope on the table in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "A summary of your removal from the trust," she said calmly. "You're still in my will, but not as the beneficiary of the estate. That will go into public service, arts education, scholarships." Jordan looked down. He didn't argue. "I understand," he said. She studied him for a long moment, then reached out and touched his hand. "But you're still my son," she said, "and I'd rather lose a house than lose you." He didn't speak. His eyes filled with tears. Meanwhile, Lena's empire continued to crumble. She posted an apology video speaking in vague language about misunderstandings and blurred lines between inspiration and exploitation. The comments were brutal. She lost over 60,000 followers in a week. Her sponsors dropped out. She took the site down. But Elaine didn't need her to apologize. The law had spoken louder. And through it all, Elaine remained composed, not because she wasn't angry, but because she had reclaimed what mattered most, her narrative. They had tried to define her as outdated, but she had proved something else entirely. She was not a relic. She was a force, a woman who had been dismissed, disrespected, and nearly erased, but who had, without shouting, rewritten the ending using every tool the law allowed. Not with revenge, with clarity, with grace, with power. The first thing Elaine did was repaint the front door. It wasn't symbolic, not at first. The old navy blue paint had chipped at the edges, and she had simply grown tired of looking at it. But as she stood with a brush in her hand, watching the color spread deep olive green with golden undertones, something inside her shifted. There was something cleansing in the motion, in the act of choosing, of changing. For years, her house had been her legacy. Every embroidered pillow, every hand-polished copper pan, every photograph hanging just so it had all been curated out of care, memory, and love. But after what had happened, after being made a prop in someone else's narrative, she no longer wanted to preserve history. She wanted to live it differently. She didn't throw everything out. That wasn't who she was. But she began to rearrange, to reclaim. She donated the curtains she never liked, but had kept out of habit. She boxed the heirloom china not to hide it, but to protect it from becoming too sacred to use. She replaced the vase on the hallway table with a ceramic piece made by a local artist she met at the weekend market. And when a younger woman at that market recognized her from the Vogue article and asked, "Are you the Elaine from the Legacy story?" she smiled and replied, "I'm Elaine from What Comes After." Jordan came to visit more often, but he didn't stay long. The separation had changed him. He was softer now, less defensive. He brought her fresh fruit, asked for old recipes, helped clean out the attic without being asked. He apologized once more quietly, while folding the quilt she had made him for college. "I was afraid to stand up to her," he said, "and afraid to admit you were right." Elaine didn't lecture him. She didn't tell him how much it had hurt. She simply placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "Fear passes. But who you become after it, that's what matters." They didn't talk about Lena after that. She heard eventually that the brand folded, that Lena had left the city for a while, trying to recenter. Elaine didn't wish her ill. She had stopped waiting for apologies. She had made peace with the silence. Some wounds didn't need closure. They needed distance. One morning, she pulled a suitcase from the closet she hadn't opened in years. Inside were maps, postcards, and an unused notebook she had once planned to fill with travel notes. She smiled. She booked a train ticket. Her first stop was Portland. Then Santa Fe. Then a small town in Colorado where she took a 3-week course in botanical textile printing. She made scarves from leaves, learned the language of plant pigments, drank wine with strangers who became friends. She sent Jordan a postcard from each place. Not long letters, just one sentence on each. Learned how to dye fabric using rose petals. Saw a woman dance barefoot in a lavender field. Woke up to snow and felt 17 again. When she returned home, she launched a small community workshop, the Thread Room, where women of all ages could come share stories and sew. Some brought garments they wanted to save. Others brought pieces of themselves they hadn't known were salvageable. Elaine taught them to stitch hems, yes, but also how to mend pride, self-respect voice. One afternoon, a young woman stood after class and said, "You make growing older look like growing freer." Elaine didn't respond right away. She glanced at the window, at the soft light falling across the table, the chalk patterns on the wall, the warm murmur of women laughing nearby. Then she said, "It is, if you let it." She didn't need Vogue anymore. She didn't need permission or platform or acknowledgement from those who had tried to erase her. She had rebuilt herself not as a legacy, but as a lighthouse. And when others asked how she did it, how she recovered from betrayal, from humiliation, from being seen as outdated, she offered only this: "You're never too old to start over. You just need to remember what you're worth." If you want more stories where women reclaim their voice legacy and worth, subscribe now. Don't miss what's coming next.